All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. Thank you for coming out on a Friday afternoon at 3:30. Really grateful everyone is here. My name is Brian Franklin, and I'm the Deputy Director of LISC DC. For those in the room, thank you for being here. For those joining us online, thank you for being here. If you have not heard of LISC, we are a community development financial institution. It's been around for about 40 years. And I like to describe our mission as really directing capital, know-how, technical assistance to help bring neighborhood ideas to life. So we have been engaged in the region since 1982, have been engaged in Prince George's and the Blue Line Corridor for the last 3 years, and are really excited for this technical assistance panel. A big part of our work in the Blue Line has been around helping to amplify the community's priorities for development, and helping to identify short and medium term ways to kind of bring those priorities to life. And so we really view this TAP as a step in that direction. Before I go any further, I do want to just say Happy International Women's Day. It is. I am a man who has been profoundly shaped by women, and I can't. I can't have a microphone and not give thanks to my life partner and wife, Candace Maloney Franklin, and my mother, Lisa Schwartz Franklin, who I am incredibly indebted for. And also indebted just to the amazing colleagues, friends, mentors I've had the chance to work with throughout my time here. So happy International Women's Day. So just in terms of run a program, I want to pass it to Mark Gazda from ULI to tell us a little bit about the TAP process.
Thank you so much, Brian. And thank you all for coming out this afternoon. We're delighted to share our panel's recommendations with you all. But before we go into that, I'd love to give you a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. I'll go over a little bit about what the TAP process is all about. Technical assistance panels are one of the keystones of our programs here at ULI Washington, and we're so honored to be partnered with LISC DC and to be involved in this project with all of you. We'll meet our panelists, our illustrious 8+1 who couldn't be here today. We'll go over the assignment and go right into what we heard from our stakeholders yesterday and how that informed our recommendations. And then we'll end with a half hour of questions and answers. But before we go any further, you might be wondering, for those of you who haven't heard of that term before, what is a technical assistance panel? This is our opportunity to provide extremely pointed and actionable recommendations to the organizations and communities that need them most. And I think we can all agree that conversations in Prince George's County have been happening for decades, and a lot of them are the same conversations. And this is our opportunity to change the course of planning for the future. Not to sound too grandiose, but we really think that this is a catalytic item in the whole planning process that we're really proud of. We met yesterday with a lot of stakeholders, as you know, and we downloaded a lot of information. Many of us are residents and workers in Prince George's County. Many of us are not, and we're experts from all over the DMV region. So day one is really to get everyone on the same page and bring all that expertise into the right lane. We then go into a day and a half of deliberations where we formulate these recommendations that you'll hear today. And then, as you'll see, we'll present these recommendations over the next hour. We will then go and take those recommendations and put them into a report, about a 20-30 page report that details these recommendations a little bit more explicitly. And then that is published to the public. So you will all be able to see the fruits of this labor in a written form in about 2 months. In terms of what we do, we solicit expert contributions from our member base and from the community at large. We pride ourselves on being a multifaceted collection of land use experts. So you'll hear from people that have expertise in development and finance. You can hear from the folks that have had many dealings with government entities who know all about transit planning, and all of that together composes a panel that will create these balanced recommendations. But this TAP doesn't exist in a vacuum. We have put on 64 TAPs as ULI Washington over the past 20 years. And part of the whole process is that we come in at a strategic moment in the development of an area, and then we like to keep being involved in that area. This is not one and done. we like to come back and check in on progress and see how we can help further. So down the road, we re-engage with folks like LISC and other community organizations in the study area to see what more can we do to catalyze this important kind of development. Um, but none of this could be possible without an incredible sponsor in Brian and his team. So thank you to Brian, Ashley, and Rylan, and everyone from LISC who helped out with this. Thank you so much to Kim, Stacy, and Mr. Miles from the Training Source, this incredible facility that we are in here today that really epitomizes what we're trying to do and how we can conceive a vision for Prince George's County moving forward. Thank you all again. I'm going to pass it off now to our two wonderful panel chairs, Shalinda Brown and Mike Warkowski. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mike Warkowski. I'm president of Wells and Associates, and I've had the pleasure the last 2 days of being the co-chair of this ULI panel along with Shalinda Brown. We've had a really intense couple of days. We've learned a lot about Prince George's County, the Blue Line area. We've learned about the deep roots, generational, going back decades and decades, and tried to fold that into what you'll hear from us today. So I wanted to, can you go to there we go. Oh, go back. Just want to introduce the panel members, make sure I get everyone here right. So Shalinda Brown, she is the co-chair of the panel. Jessica Brunson, we have Rhonda Dallas, Amol Deshpande, Jillian Gonslaves, Ali O'Neill, Will Zide, and one person who could not be here today, Nihar Shah, who couldn't make it for the second day of the panel. So I will turn it over to Shalinda, and we will get on with the presentation.
Good afternoon. So the assignment we had for in the goals of this TAP was to develop a vision of placekeeping and placemaking for the western portion of the Blue Line corridor, to determine market feasible near-term projects that address the most relevant community priorities, and to identify actionable steps to support and increase community power to affect land use. So we were charged as a panel to answer 4 questions. Revitalization that respects and reflects the communities. How can this corridor be enhanced to honor history and culture to prevent displacement and attract new folks? Leveraging geography and demographics. How can we leverage our geography and demographics for inclusive, equitable growth? Near-term development opportunities. Which vacant and underutilized sites have the most potential for development? And then community empowerment. What steps can be taken to build municipalities and community capacities to pursue their visions? So you will hear from our group of panelists that will address these questions. I first also want to, before you hear from them, thank our stakeholders. So as Mike mentioned, we met yesterday and toured sites with folks from the municipalities, public officials, developers, the private sector. I'm sorry, I thought I was getting that you couldn't hear me in the back. The community members and representatives from local CDCs in the area. Again, here is the panelists and the staff that were a part of this TAP. And this is a little bit of a representation of our stakeholder meetings and sessions yesterday. So thank you all that are in the room that came out yesterday, and thank you that are online watching to get this feedback. So what we heard in our stakeholder roundtable was there's a misinformation and lack of information that takes place, that has taken place over the years. There is a food desert and a bank desert and a much need for a grocery store. I think every breakout session spoke about a grocery store. It is dangerous for the pedestrians. You'll hear through some of the traffic studies that we've seen a lot of fatalities along the roads. We also want to understand how we can establish a better sense of place and identity across the 3 municipalities that we were focused on. And then there's an interest in job creation and workforce development. That around African American history must be preserved. So we'll hear a little about that and our placemaking. And how do we continue to make sure that this area doesn't get overlooked as people go through a thoroughfare from Central Avenue up to the eastern part and connected into the district. And then also for a need of greater diversity of housing options. So now we will talk about community identity from Allie and Rhonda.
Thank you. Yes, I think when LISC thinks, thank you, Shalinda and Michael, when LISC thinks about kind of inclusive and equitable development, engaging with a diverse range of stakeholders is at the center of that, and public-private partners are at the center of that. And so a key kind of partner for us on the public side has been District 7 Council Member Crystal Oriava, who is here with us today. And I just wanted to pass the mic to her to say a few words.
Hello, everyone. For those that I have not had the pleasure of meeting in person, Councilwoman Crystal Orietta representing District 7, the district that you all are here in. So welcome to my district. And so I apologize that I wasn't able to be here in person yesterday because of matters with council, but I really wanted to stop by today. The work of this coalition around the Blue Line Corridor is so important. It's a huge opportunity for development that has not been seen on this side of the community. And the point that was made, making sure that it's equitably dispersed resources along the entire Blue Line corridor is a commitment of mine. And so there's an opportunity here from development, but we want to make sure that one, we hear from the stakeholders, the community, that they're at the forefront, and two, with all new development, that it's done in a thoughtful way that doesn't mean gentrification. That's so important to me, especially when develop around metro stations, because all these amazing things can come into the community, and then every single person that's lived in that community is pushed out and no longer can enjoy all of the resources that have been put in. And so, how do we make sure that we have a diverse ecosystem with both market and affordable? How do we make sure we build a climate that makes sure that our seniors can still age in place in this community that they've poured into, while we also attract young and new people to move into the community? And so that work takes time, that work takes engagement. And so I'm just thankful for you, Brian from LISC, and I see Kyle, I have to shout him out, Kyle from Capital Market, and all the stakeholders in the room, because you guys have made sure that we do that. And thank you for including me in the work. So I'm looking forward to the presentation today.
Oh, hey. So good afternoon, everyone. And as everyone has echoed, we are so happy that you are here. Participation is critical. We want a collective voice as we're moving forward. And my name is Rhonda Dallas. I'm the CEO and Chief Curator for the Prince George's Arts and Humanities Council. And I've been working on development strategies for public art and creative placemaking since the inception. And so this is a critical piece, and you'll hear through our presentation the voices that we heard throughout the sessions yesterday.
And hello, everyone. It's lovely to be with you. I'm Allie O'Neill. I'm trained as an architect, and I work in the community development, participatory design, and facilitation space. I've had the absolute pleasure of working on placemaking projects throughout the county, and I'm thrilled to be with you today.
And may I also say that Councilmember Oriata has been such a staunch supporter of the arts, so we appreciate all of your efforts. So first of all, I'd like to say there is a overarching theme when we listened to the stakeholders in our session and also amongst the panelists, and that theme is highlighting the western portion of the Blue Line Corridor's rich historical and cultural assets to create inclusive destinations. And I want to highlight that word inclusive because we think it's so important as communities are telling their stories that they are authentic. And we heard the stakeholders in our sessions. This is a listing of things that have come out. Just want to highlight a few. Desire for improved streetscapes and safe crossings. Highlight neighborhood gateways. How can we use the assets of cultural arts and historical assets to tell the stories at very critical moments throughout the neighborhood, which we are considering gateways?
And as we had conversations and as we learned and looked and everyone shared with us, we see that there are so many opportunities. Just to highlight a few, what we know is that we do have land still available, and it's at a wide variety of scales. That really does create so much potential. And the question that for us as we look at kind of a sense of place and a community identity is, how can the community leverage these spaces, specifically for cultural, civic, and storytelling use? So how are we really making sure that our stories, our places, and our people are set here? We also know development's coming. It is. And so what can happen? What requirements can be put in place? How can that be leveraged in order to add public art, local history, create the spaces that we hear about so often, walkable, pedestrian-friendly, safe places where people are going to bump into their neighbors, they're going to take lovely walks, and you're going to have that community that we already know is here, but you have places to do it safely. And we know the connector trail is coming, and we'll hear a lot about that. And we think that that's actually such an opportunity to really catalyze and start to make manifest a lot of the things that you all see. Oh, yeah.
So we looked at some technical assistance tools, and two in the state of Maryland, which have been very important in using arts and culture for revitalizing communities, the Main Street Maryland program, and also the Maryland Arts and Entertainment Districts. We have best practices throughout the states, and so these are tools for aspirations and visioning within the communities.
We also wanted to make sure that we had specific examples of places, both local and national, that you all can look to. Long Branch, which is just across the border in Montgomery County, adjacent to Silver Spring, is a very, very diverse community that has worked very hard to proactively keep its small businesses that are reflective of its beautiful, diverse community. It shows up in its built environment, it shows up in its planning, it shows up in how people organize. We think there are a lot of lessons that could be gleaned from Long Branch and Discover Long Branch and how they come together.
And another case study is Destination Crenshaw. And even though it's on the West Coast, there are many synergies with what we are trying to achieve here at the Blue Line Corridor. And Destination Crenshaw, it's transforming a 1.3 mile stretch of Crenshaw Boulevard. And one of the things that I'd like to highlight that in celebrating local Black art and culture, they also have a mission of economic development and job creation.
So what are the ways that we take advantage of the opportunities? How do we answer the questions that were put forth earlier? So one action item is to start looking at storytelling through place. We know that there are so many assets. We hear about them, we see them. There's an opportunity to actually compile these histories and stories into a single place, to really start to use them as a launching point for projects. And we know that we have projects in the works. The Fairmount Heights Net Zero Townhomes have a beautiful pocket park project where in a development that is increasing density in a neighborhood at a nice light rate, they're also highlighting community history, community stories, and are building on a walking trail that already existed. There's so much here. So what we're saying is strengthen, amplify, continue building on what is already so valuable.
So when we look at assets that are existing already, these are two examples. We have the Fairmont Heights School, the Ridgewell Rosenwald School. Laverne, thank you for being a participant and being in the roundtable discussion. So when we are telling our story and looking at these different ways of highlighting destinations, it's critical for us to see what exists already in the community. What are the community assets? What are the cultural assets? What are the cultural assets? And making sure that they are being highlighted.
And as we talked about, we do know that there is the Central Avenue Connector Trail coming in. This is an opportunity to connect existing communities, and it's an opportunity to overlay real moments of joy, moments of beauty, moments of learning along this corridor, connecting our different communities. Oh. And then, in addition, we know that there's already been strong work done around principles for placemaking. And we would actually encourage that there to be a larger scale adoption of and advocacy for the Coalition of Central Prince George's County's their Coalition for Central Prince George's County's community organizations principles. We think those are a really, really strong baseline, and that predated us. That's already been here. We also think that catalytic projects in key areas, such as the addition of murals and public art at metro stations, is a way to start bringing in the arts in the built environment in the way that we think it could start to happen.
And always including public art and cultural projects when considering new development projects, and use resources that are right here. Agencies such as the Prince George's Arts and Humanities Council and Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, their placemaking division.
I'm just going to very briefly, Addison Road Metro. Are we familiar with it? Yeah? Okay. Let's go to the next one. So this is just a conceptual rendering. It's just an idea. But what we know is that this is a place that has very strong visual value. It has a huge presence. What does it look like to have a sculpture garden in the front, to have landscaping that reflects the lilacs of the Ridgely farm community? We heard that those have special significance. A meadow of Maryland pollinators. What does it look like to have local artists creating murals and banners on the building? How can we start to talk about our place, add street trees to make it wonderful to walk there? How do banners let you know that there's where you are? How do we reflect the pride in place in our built environment? So there's just a few examples of that.
And how do we also use public art at our intersections? And you'll hear more from our panel that talks about the safety concerns, but to use public art not just for visual enhancements. There are many national studies that are going on right now and best practices that show how using art at these major intersections curtails accidents and also increases public safety, vehicular and also pedestrian.
All right, and then last but not least, certainly is, we've said time and time again, assets exist. The investment has to be local first. So how can all developments advocate for local sourcing, enhance small businesses, invest in small businesses in order to enhance capacity, and even prioritize activities and programs that can be accomplished within the existing resources? This is how everyone who's here doing the work, stewarding that beautiful vision continues to lead, because the investment starts there and then it builds out. And we feel as though this is the way that this corridor really continues to reflect all of the amazing strengths that are here today.
All right, so now we'd like to bring up mobility and access strategy panel.
Well, afternoon, everyone. I am Jessica Brunson. I am a transit planner and community engagement coordinator that works with STV in DC. And we work on various projects just like these, in which we were talking about, from metro to micromobility to pedestrian engagement.
Will Zide. I'm with Grove Slater Consulting Firm. I do traffic and transportation, planning and engineering. I'll go ahead and kick this off for mobility and access. This works. Okay. So beginning just sort of an overview of what we were looking at from the transportation side of things. We took sort of a two-step approach to this. One is taking a look, and first and foremost is taking a look at the safety along the corridor. We heard a lot about that from the stakeholders. And two is looking at large-scale public infrastructure improvements that could not only increase the appetite for development along the corridor and sort of catalyze that development, but would immediately address those safety concerns. So it's not just building for the future, but it's building for the people that are here today as well. The first step in this process, as you heard before, was a stakeholder engagement. We had a really great group that we got to speak to that was well prepared, both state and local agencies that have projects in the area. Maryland State Highways working on a safety improvement project along Central Avenue. Parks Department let us know a lot about the Central Avenue Connector Trail. We had some local developers that gave us some sort of insight on, what they would like to see from the transportation side of things to make the area sort of more appetizing for growth and to how to attract new tenants to retail spaces and maybe tenants that the residents here would like to see that just aren't coming today. Some of the feedback we received is that there is existing transportation infrastructure, obviously. We're right next to the metro stations. A lot of roads do have sidewalks. You get deeper into the residential neighborhoods, you might not have them on the smaller streets, but the large streets do generally have them in most locations. So that's the good part. Bad part is they're poorly lit, they're falling apart. There's very little buffering of these sidewalks from the road. You get very fast roadways along Central Avenue, 6 lanes, 40, 50 mile an hour traffic. You're walking 2 feet from a passing semi, it's 2 feet away from you. So those are the bad things. Also, just local destinations that you can walk to. We're close to metro, so getting to and from the metro, we heard, grabbing a bus to get to the metro to go to work, that's not so much a problem. There's connectivity for that. It's where do you go after work or before work or on the weekend? There's nowhere to really walk to just sort of be and hang out, right? There's no destinations. Not to say there's nothing, but there's no destinations that you really just want to go to and spend the day or the afternoon. So Central Avenue, we heard, is really sort of seen as a pass through the community, right? It's not necessarily an asset to the neighborhood. It's not a road you really use to get places. It's really a road that's almost a barrier between the north and the south sides of the corridor. 6 lanes, get to 8 lanes at some intersections when you count turn lanes, fast moving traffic, etc. Moving east to west along it, as I said, it's not a comfortable walking experience. And then we can go on to one of the biggest things that we do have leverage that we heard from Maryland State Highway and local jurisdictions is the planned improvements that are coming. As we mentioned, the connector trail, which is happening. Like that improvement is going to happen. You can count on that. Maryland State Highway is doing an in-depth study along Central Avenue that could have huge benefits for the community. And we're talking corridor-wide infrastructure improvements. Nothing's solid yet, but like that's something that they're looking at as part of a new program. So these are things that can all be leveraged to move forward.
Now, as far as seeing the feedback, we also wanted to look at the aspirations in which we talked about. So we talked about that there may be inadequate options and assets and the roads and the setups of the different designs of what we have here. So we're looking at connecting also non-auto networks, which can include bike and pedestrian service, and also to all these historical and cultural places that you can have for typical and daily needs that we hope that can thrive for this area. And also with that, we saw an abundance of different studies. So the work has been done, the research is there. It's now time to act on those things. So we look at things as such as Vision Zero, the Central Avenue Connector Trail, which is the CACT, the SHA, which is the Highway Administration, involving pedestrian safety and action plans, and the Green Streets plans, which pertain to those green assets like street trees or maybe the artwork, and we kind of combine all those integrities together and looking at the recharacterization of all these streets like Old and New Central Avenue. And that connectivity can lead to combining municipalities within this area, which can aspire to have that action implemented. So if you look here at these 2 images, we have the Capitol Heights looking south, and those are part of the Green Street plans as far as, how can we change this? What can make it look better? And if you're thinking better, it may not just be trees. It may be how your kids get back and forth to school, because as soon as you walk out that door or as soon as you get in and out of your car, transportation is valued, and it's going to matter of how you place and implement structures for future endeavors.
Okay, so this map that we're looking at right here, this is kind of a scary map, and I'm sure a lot of you that are local to the area are well familiar with this. Each one of the dots on this map is a fatality, either from vehicle, pedestrian, and bicycle. And we have all 3 of those represented here. This isn't a very long section of road in the scheme of things. Inside the Beltway, seeing this many dots is very concerning. Obviously, it's a red flag. Something's wrong here. Looking at Old Central Avenue all by itself here, a little over a mile, 2 miles, 4 deaths along a 2-lane road inside the Beltway. That's it's almost unheard of, right? You don't see this. So something has to happen. And this is recognized. The good news is SHA knows this, right? They're looking into this. They recognize there's an issue here. This is something the community can leverage to sort of push for. You guys should be involved in that process. Make your feelings and your preferences known as part of that process. So this is among the top 10 most dangerous areas in the state on state routes. Narrow sidewalks without buffers, as we mentioned, high speed, all of these things went into sort of what we looked at through here, and just to sort of come up with some ideas on large scale improvements. And a lot of this, we sort of came up with the ideas, do more research and find a lot of this is already planned, right? Or it's been envisioned before. So it's really about pulling all of this together. It's this organizational piece, right? Multiple municipalities, state roads, county roads, municipal roads. How do you get that all together? So there needs to be a central vision to make those improvements work. So we'll start off by looking at Central Avenue, so what we call New Central Avenue, right? Not Old Central, because it's sort of a different character from Old Central. So today this is a 6-lane arterial road. It really just moves people through the area, right? Looking at the data, traffic along Central Avenue, around 30-something, 32,000 vehicles per day. It's already back to pre-pandemic levels. We look at the metro stations, they're not. They're at 60%, 70% of pre-pandemic levels. This tells us that Central people would prefer to drive through the area than take the metro, right? 32,000 vehicles per day is a big number. It's not necessarily a 6-lane needs number, right? It could potentially be accommodated with 4 lanes, with the correct lanes at the intersections to handle the heavier turning movements. What we're saying here is there's capacity here. I think SHA recognizes this from what they told us, and they are looking into this corridor as part of one of their new programs to see if maybe a road diet, right? Intersection improvements. And a road diet, that's sort of the big, what we see as a potential corridor-wide improvement. One of the biggest hindrances to fixing these types of sidewalks that don't have any buffer to separate you from traffic is right away. If you look off, I don't know if you can see it here, along a lot of the corridor, the power poles are a foot behind the sidewalks. So even if you wanted to move the sidewalks, you have to underground the utilities or move the utilities, right? You need to take people's yards, their backyards, et cetera. So when we look at a corridor, if there is existing infrastructure capacity that can be reduced, take away the outside travel lanes, drop it to 4 lanes, use that 12 feet of pavement on each side of the road to get what we see here on the bottom. You know, this is a future vision. You do, 8-foot sidewalks, maybe a bike lane, you get a buffer, you do that on both sides, you do the whole corridor, and what that does is that creates an environment where it's safer to walk. People want to be out. The street gets activated. People are out there. They're using this. The parcels next to it are now not next to, this fast-moving roadway with cars whizzing by. They see trees out the front. All of a sudden, this empty parking lot, maybe it can become something else. Maybe it's not just commercial. Maybe it's residential because you wouldn't mind living there. Whereas opposed, you look at it today, you probably don't want to live right on the edge of Central Avenue, right? So as we mentioned, so I'll go through this quickly because we kind of touched on this a lot. So Central Avenue Connector Trail is an active plan. That's happening. That is coming in. As far as Central Avenue goes, it's just one piece. It's just on the south side of Central Avenue through the western end, and then it meanders, it goes up north, et cetera. But what that'll do is that will provide a nice, bike path that will also be a shared use path that'll reconstruct the sidewalks. It's a piece of it. Oh, forever the mic. So it's a piece of the puzzle with SHA coming in to look at. But one thing we mentioned there, it only includes from sort of where the new and old split to the east on Central Avenue itself. So it does not have plans to do anything from the DC line to that point. Good news is SHA's study starts at the DC line and goes all the way out to Ritchie Road. So that's a huge area. That could be a massive improvement for the corridor. They don't know what they're going to do yet. They're just looking at it right now, but it's a tangible program that could really come. So that's something that should, obviously be coordinated between the local, state governments. The municipalities should get involved to voice their opinions on how they see that going. Okay, stepping in, Old Central Avenue, which we talked about, 4 fatalities along this road. Clearly there's something wrong. Looking at the road, we can kind of see why. It's a highway. It's a 2-lane highway going through this area when it doesn't need to be. These are wide lanes. They even have a little bit of a shoulder. It's a comfortable road to sort of speed down, if you will. All of the buildings are set pretty far back from the sidewalks, so it's very open. We think of driving when you sort of have stuff to your side, it's called side friction. It kind of slows you down. You don't feel as comfortable going faster. You remove all those obstructions, you widen that space out for a driver, you go faster and faster through an area. So what we see, and this kind of is in line with some previous visions for this area, is sort of turning this into a smaller, more Main Street feel along Old Central Avenue, narrower lanes, using some of that space that's left over, and then using the fact that the buildings are set back today, maybe there is some space there that could become available to widen those lanes. The green bike lanes you'll see there on the what would be the north side of the road, that's part of the Central Avenue Connector Trail plan. So that's coming at some point, right? We've sort of built onto that and looked at the other side and say, widen that sidewalk too. Get a little bit of buffer in there. Make this so that those commercial properties along there, they become more of a space where something else could come in. It could come in closer to the sidewalk. Maybe it's a little shop, et cetera. And you do get that feel right around the town hall down there. It's got that kind of feel, but it's just one tiny little piece. So that could extend down that corridor and really become something through that area.
So if you have ridden, driven, walked Addison Road, you know what it's like out there. And we're looking at transit-oriented development today and using existing places for this possibility of rethinking. If you've ever crossed Addison Road, which I had the pleasure of doing yesterday, you're crossing what feels like almost 495, and you're waiting there and you're like, I press the button, somebody else comes up because they think you didn't press the button, but you did because you want to know, how am I going to cross this safely with cars coming downhill, speeding uphill? Who knows what's going to happen next? So when you're looking at that, you're looking at, how do we get a group of people of all ages and abilities safely across the road, connecting that population, that capacity to those places. So if you want to head to the Shell or get a good taco at Taco Bell, you can see what that incentivizing is for committing to that road, committing to that implementation of development and investment, to making sure that those people from the metro station get across to what they need. And if that need is something healthier, that may be to the trails that are being developed, to the trails that need to be there. So you can not only be within your area, but have that extension to outside your area. So responses, we looked at the actions maybe for a framework development to look at the local zoning plans, look at the policies and the ordinances that kind of restrict, so you can actually broaden your horizons of what can be developed, like taking those setbacks from buildings when we were talking about the actual design of a road, or if we're looking at block level approaches, taking an even micro look at what can we do to say that this works. And when we're talking about crossing a road, modernizing that signalization, making sure that it actually works and that it's also responding to the time. So if you have a bad back that day, you want to be able to cross in 90 seconds or maybe a minute or so rather than the 30 seconds that usually is sometimes given. And those auto reactions, maybe it is a weight-based type of place, and maybe it's ADA compliant. So we also have to think of all those types of abilities that are crossing a road or enduring other types of destinations. And with that, we talk about equity. So redesign stops locations. Some of the bus stops are located in shoulders. Sometimes they're not existent, and you need to look at the design of that. Sometimes you might be out on a hot day and you want the shade or maybe something to look at. So you start incorporating those art aspects and you start looking at the transitions of the aesthetics of a road, and then transforming these highway-like roads into slower moving streets. It may be sounding like, oh, well, it's already 30 miles per hour, but people are actually doing 50. So we want to update those transportation measures so you can have a safe arrival. And these safe arrivals are talking about whether you're in a car, whether you're riding or biking, thinking of how your child or someone can get from their work or their school to their residence safely, and adopting those access points for more metrics to be had and more things to think about to improve. How can we improve these crosswalks and intersections for pedestrians to have that refuge, to feel that safe? So it's not just a perception, but it's also a reality for action. And so we talk about also, what do we need to connect to? Those daily needs, those destinations. So we kind of went through a little bit of the goals to improve the walkability. Learning to living pathways is, hey, I'm going to school and I also want to get to my living residence, and finding that pathway. And we look at these kind of walk sheds here.
This area, I guess, covered here are 10-minute walk from the metro stations. So we want to see if we can have active routes to the metro and other communities, and combining all of these municipalities into one to see how that connectivity brings opportunity to these spaces. And lastly, we have these action items, which is a strong word that we definitely heard in our feedback from our stakeholders, is that we want to take what we have, that education, those surveys, these assets, to leverage what has been done for these trails, identify these destinations so you have some place to go, develop those combined municipalities into an action plan for connectivity and opportunities, and see what the impact is going to drive. And also considering people like the SHA to pilot programs that consider short term programs or projects for long term transportation goals.
Same thing. Okay, I think we're done. We have up to land use.
So I'm Julian Gonsalves, Assistant City Manager for Public-Private Partnerships for the City of Alexandria.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amol Deshpande with LISC Landscape Architecture. I'm one of the principals there. I'm really excited to be here with you.
So this is a statement actually from one of our stakeholders. It kind of acknowledged the feeling generally, that people understand that change is coming, and we understand it will be hard, but the time is right to ensure equitable development, and planning for that helps with equitable development. And so what does that represent in terms of land use and development when we talk about being equitable? We already know what the community needs are. We have heard about grocery stores, about quality restaurants, about places to gather, about places for joy and for infrastructure. And that community needs to drive, the development, the partnerships. Here you see kind of the gears which actually move each other. And, someone was saying that, community input and empowerment is like the grease that moves these wheels together. And in order for development to be positive, intentional, and inclusive, you need those partnerships. You need for the local communities to be heard by the counties, by the state, by federal governments to kind of leverage those kind of resources. You have HUD and transit-oriented development, grant fundings, low interest financing. How do you leverage all of those funds? And then how to kind of partner with unincorporated areas or other organizations like LISC and others here to kind of ensure that, when you come up with a plan for development, you account for all of these partnerships, funding sources, and strength really to kind of ensure that community needs are being met. So what do we mean by development can be positive? A part of that positive is really about the fiscal and economic positive nature of development. Here's a statement from the City of Alexandria and Alexandria Economic Development Partnership fiscal impact analysis. For every new tax dollar that comes into a city from a multifamily development, 62 cents is available for general budget needs. So basically, really, when some new development comes in, we need obviously, there are costs to the city to kind of serve those residents, but then you have actually 62% of that available for the general funds. So those funds can be used for community needs when they come in. On the left-hand side, I guess your right-hand side, you'll see the business case being made for Carrollton, that when you put in investment up front for development, you can have increased tax dollars, increase local and state tax dollars. How do you direct that for the community needs? There are many ways to kind of ensure that that happens. You can use tax incremental financing, special assessment districts, invest in infrastructure. You could also allow for tax exemptions and abatements to kind of leverage that, 62% that's additional funds that are available to ensure that development happens the way you want it to happen. This is just an example of the New Carrollton case where, they're showcasing all the different investments that need to be made in order for the positive development to happen.
So when we are talking about the positive development, we also heard from the community that yes, they are expecting, they want to see the change to happen, but at the same time, they don't want this change to happen at the expense of displacement of old time residents, and it needs to be very intentional. So it's important that we, again, like Julian said, community engagement when we develop these plans is extremely important. And we can look at the Roslyn Boston corridor as an example. Uh, what we can learn from it is how the county was able to leverage the metro stations and really develop around those metro stations various types of development that's dense. It could consist of high rise or maybe just mixed use, multifamily residential, townhomes, different variety of residential options that are attainable. And so that can be implemented somewhat in our area. And you can see on the right hand side the image that shows basically the two metro stations with a 10-minute walking distance around it. And that kind of bullseye concept can easily be incorporated in the development of this area. This is again just an example, or not example, but the study from the sector plan market study. We can see that there are many different developments that are already in the process. We were able to visit many of those sites yesterday, and it's exciting to see that those development patterns are already sort of falling in line with that bullseye concept. And again, this is overlapping the 10-minute walking distance on the plan that shows all the vacant properties. Again, a lot of time, several people have mentioned that vacant properties is an asset, and we can really leverage that. And I think Will was also mentioning here the old Central Avenue corridor. I- you can see that there is a pattern. The proposed developments, the metro station, and if we can just simply leverage those existing assets, we can really create a sense of place along the Central Avenue, old Central Avenue, as well as going up into the other study areas.
And one thing you can see is that the single family residences are not really impacted there. You can still have that coexistence. It's similar to the Rosalind concept. As you went away from the bullseye, from the high residential dense development, you have that it transitions into single family. So that just does allow different forms of ownership, if you can, so that you can age in place. As you grow older, if you want something that is more within your means, you still also have like probably like townhouses or smaller plot sizes where people can stay. So that allows for different forms of attainable housing to the community. So the third aspect that we mentioned, development being positive, being intentional, is also it needs to be inclusive. And this is just an example from the city of Alexandria. There's a neighborhood called Arlandia Chilagua, where it's primarily Hispanic population that had immigrated to the city. And in this case, there was a recognition that there was going to be increasingly a risk of them being priced out of their neighborhood. And then after that, you had Amazon HQ2 and you had Virginia Tech Innovation Campus announced. So when that happened, the city made a concerted effort of updating the small area plan. So there was a change from the 2003 small area plan to 2021. And you can see the emphasis on attainable housing, affordable housing, ensuring that the folks who live there could stay in place to preserve housing in place. And one of the other highlights of this, and the reason why it won the 2022 Commonwealth Plan of the Year, was because of the Spanish first approach for that neighborhood. It was the planning effort was very specific to that neighborhood. We recognized what that neighborhood needed, and we targeted that. So similarly, when you talk about this corridor, it has to be very intentional. What are the needs of the community, and that should be the approach to approach such kind of small area plan. And I think from what we have heard and seen, the sector area plan that is being updated appears to be doing that. I think we heard that from the stakeholders yesterday, that it seems to be doing that, the update from the 2008 plan to the current plan. So just going in terms of some of the action items. So the first thing is about asset activation. We know that the various localities here have assets and vacant lands that could potentially be activated. But we are thinking of, that needs to be evaluated from not only from a redevelopment perspective, but also from an activation perspective to address the community needs. And there are different lenses to look at this. I think Ali and Rhonda mentioned about the civic, cultural, and community spaces. So including that beyond just a large scale development, you can also look at small scale residential development, whether it's making ensuring that there's place for the current residents to live. You can also look at small scale commercial development. Uh, in order to do these kind of evaluations, can leverage potential support from using planning assistance from the planning community, partnering with the University of Maryland Real Estate Development Program, or organizations like LISC and others. Once you kind of do the evaluation of these assets, grouping them into what are some of these plots which are so small that couldn't really lead to redevelopment, you can then identify the funding and resource needs for each of these short-term, temporary short-term, and long-term activation exercises. The committees and the unincorporated areas need to jointly identify how they'll deploy their combined resources and allocate those resources to those exercises. Also, this can be used to inform land use decisions. If you have some pockets of vacant land which can't be developed because for the current land use decisions, how can you create a plan that you can go and take to the county and say, see, this is our plan of how we'll activate it, and this is the change we need to see in terms of land use, and then that also helps identify any funding and resource gap. And this really highlights some of the what Ali and Rhonda spoke about the small area, a small parcel land activation. How you can convene nonprofits, church, businesses, community groups to create an inventory of these assets from a civic, cultural, and community space aspect to reflect the unique historic and cultural identity of this corridor, and how you can utilize other existing funding sources which you might not necessarily look at when you talk about just land, because you might always think about land in terms of redevelopment. But if you look at it from a civic and cultural aspect, you can access other kind of funding sources. And this is just an example of how a vacant land could be used in terms of those like civic and cultural activation. Finally, in terms of deployment, so once you have kind of identified the solutions for these short-term or long-term activation or development, identifying solutions to fund for funding and to fill the resource gap to bring these projects to life. You can then also dedicate or leverage increased tax revenues from future development or funding resources to finance the upfront costs and fund the ongoing community needs or resource gaps. In terms of allocating the extra funds that come from this new development, we think there are primarily three buckets. There's the infrastructure to make these developments happen for attainable housing and preserving housing, and other community needs like the priorities that you'll have, like grocery stores and quality dining options.
So this is the last group that we had a chance to meet with some of our public officials and the municipality leaders. And so we're going to talk a little bit about agency coordination in the public process, leveraging assets for an inclusive and equitable growth along the western portion of the Blue Line Corridor. So what we heard in our meeting with the local officials is that there is certainly a lack of coordination and consistency that exists between the local municipalities and the county agencies. There is a need for them to come together, to collaborate, to find a shared goals and organize themselves around that for collective action, figure out what's important individually within and what's unique for their individual municipalities and that's common. They need to also engage more with not only their communities but also, as we've heard there are a number of HOA associations and unincorporated entities or residents that also need to be brought into the fold. We also heard that the residents feel like they are not being heard and included and a part of some of the long-term planning and development process that has been underway. And then the last thing is there are a lot of folks that have fatigue. As you've heard, there are a number of different plans, a multitude of plans that have taken place over the last 20 to 30 years as it relates to just development within the county in general, and then more specifically around the blue line corridor. And so folks are ready to see more action and implementation versus just a lot of studies. So some recommendations that we have is for the agencies to engage together on a regular, come together on a regular basis. I heard from one of the council members that she actually puts in her budget money for like a tri-city investment activity. So we're encouraging the city of Capitol Heights, Fairmont Heights, Seat Pleasant for them to all come together. And that's something that can be done in the short term. The weather's getting nice. They can organize themselves with their communities and come out to like hear from their constituents, to establish partnerships with funding sources, to also stay up to date on potential federal funding and resources that are coming out. So there is billions of dollars that are about to be hitting the streets this summer around GGRF, the Green Gas Redevelopment Funds from the government. And so it's important for everyone to stay up to speed and knowledgeable about what those resources are to ensure that there's a way they get funneled down, not just at the state level, but down to the local levels. Also, to maintain flexibility and to be for changes that are happening in the marketplace. So again, we're here to talk about development around transit-oriented development. But we all know that in a post-pandemic and through past COVID, that transportation needs are changing, the way people travel to work, the way people work. There's a more hybrid. Folks are staying home sometimes. So we also need to make sure we're being mindful of the changes that may come from WMATA, and make sure that we are having our voice to make sure we're activating those sites in a way that is meaningful for our communities, particularly if folks are not all commuting back into work. So how do we make sure we're being thoughtful about the type of development that needs to come around the transit oriented, so that we can increase and bring in more types of housing that also will lead to more retail, that will also get you the grocery store, which we heard loud and clear that folks need. So in order for that to happen, we need to have a multitude of different types of housing, not just multifamily housing, but townhousing, townhomes, and then also complementary and upgrades to the existing single family homes that are there in the residence. And then the last thing is, which is leveraging the landholders. I think you've heard from some of our other panelists, there are a lot of different vacant sites, some that may be small and may not be developable for private investors to come in, but they can definitely be used and leveraged for cultural aspects, which is also a thing to drive economic development into communities.
Thank you. So the other thing we tackled along with that process is also the public process. These kind of go hand in hand with each other, and a lot of the things that we heard, which probably not surprising to a lot of you, is that the development process is very complex. It can be very unpredictable. That makes it difficult for developers to make commitments to put down funds for development. The more predictable a process is, that the understanding is, the more likely that development will occur. Also, we understand that there are such deep roots here. The residents, longtime residents, we want to draw new residents also, but we need to keep the roots that we've got and make sure that we take care of those things that keep communities together. We also understood that sometimes the investment takes a long time to show up. So plans will be prepared, all the best intentions, but 5, 6, 10 years later, there's not much to show for it. And so we understand those frustrations that people have, and also the desire for new businesses, along with the housing stock, which we sort of talked about and others touched on, and how we want to maintain the kind of development and housing that we have, but also cater to new residents too, because that brings growth, and that can be a good thing if it can be in the equitable way, and also along with job growth and workforce development. So all those things kind of are at play together if we can somehow harness them all at once. So where we talked about as a group and really went through some of our recommendations is we really need a champion. We need a group, whether it's our sponsors, LISC, or others. We need a champion to establish a community-based organization. You'll see at the very bottom of this slide, I think, there's a potential for a business development district, central business district, or development authority. We think that may be a future thing. The reason being that I think our concern is that we'd be just creating too many layers too early on, that we need short-term goals and wins and then look out into the future, not complicate things that get diluted because we have so many layers there. We heard that as kind of a recurring theme as we spoke to all the agencies, we talked to people, we had stakeholder comments. We really thought that this group could work to educate public officials, the community on the development process and how those things actually work. Because again, we've heard, well, we don't have a voice. We're not going to get the kind of development and economic growth that we want. We'll get it, but somebody else will make that decision. And that's what we're trying to avoid. But in order to do that, you need to have understanding of the process, where you fit in, where you can have your voice, and how that may also work. And also getting input not just from the local stakeholders, but the unincorporated HOAs and such that also have a big influence in how development projects really move forward. Understanding that they're very complicated, there are a number of community issues and you deal with them regardless of the type of development that you've got. So you've got to satisfy them as you go through it. And by doing that, through this education, you empower the public officials, the community to understand, okay, here are our choices. Here are the things we can do to make a difference, to really understand and get the types of development that everybody wants. There is a case study that we have referenced, which is the Greater Riverdale Thrives case study. So this is very similar in the sense that it's a community-based group. They meet on a monthly basis. That allows for education. It allows to bring public officials together and really promote the kinds of things that everybody wants to see on the economic development side.
So some action items that we have, as Mike mentioned, creating a community-based organization. So we just used the case study for the Greater Riverdale Thrives. We think this is key to ensuring that the work that is underway gets amplified and gets expedited, if you will, by bringing together an organization that can coordinate the efforts amongst the different municipalities and the unincorporated areas, as well as the overall membership and the private sector and developers that are in this area. They can also hear and communicate the interest. They can advocate on behalf of the entire communities and to make sure that they're promoting inclusive development. So we feel like it's essential to make sure you have someone, so it's not just like we're hearing there's a bunch of plans and there's plans and plans, but actually putting together an organization that will come together, that can be a collective voice and advocate and implement for this change to happen. To engage with the local municipalities, again, in the unincorporated areas, the CBO could do that to educate public municipalities and focus on the development process, as Mike has already mentioned, and then to research funding sources for the near-term opportunities. So our key recommendations, we have 4 things, and the first is to create a repository of community assets across the corridor to reflect the unique community identities in the built environment, to implement short-term safety improvements and invest in long-term projects that create more desirable development sites. So you heard from our folks that we're working with the safety issues and the transportation, and to put those, to implement those, to conduct a land and asset inventory activation exercise and coordinate resource allocation. So it's important that the three cities here understand what they have and the value of those assets so they can be better leveraged. And then again, the last, I think, important thing is again to establish a community-based organization to be a voice to advocate on behalf of the municipalities and the community to promote inclusive and equitable development. We think that this is something that our sponsor, LISC, could also help to seed and help stand up such an organization. We know that it's not people, we have the capital markets folks that's been here and they've been doing wonderful work in the community for years and they're volunteering their time. But in order to really see real action and for things to go and happen and be implemented, you need to probably have like a paid organization and someone that can help to build the capacity and bring all of the stakeholders together, and also to be able to communicate not just at the local level, but the county and the state level as well. So those are our key recommendations. We will now open it up for any questions.
Thank you. Microphone. Wow. You must have done a good
Like,
job.
how do we?
I think there's a microphone right there, I think.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Drickford. I'm from the Capital Market. Just to kind of really quickly introduce myself, I'm a sixth-generation resident of Prince George's County. I am related to the Ridgely community, which is a historic community in Prince George's County in Central Avenue on the Blue Line corridor. First of all, I just want to say this presentation, your recommendation, I mean, I didn't get to participate in all of the tables, right? But it seemed to truly capture the essence of like, this is what we need. Okay, it feels so good to say, okay, some other people get it. People are outside of the community. They understand like there are in some places up to 9 lanes of traffic and what that feels like. I mean, we did a pop-up market at the Addison Road Metro Station, and I met community members who are in wheelchairs or it takes them 2 hours to get to a grocery store. So it feels good to have, that validation that other people see it. And now I'm, excited to like take on the charge and say, what's next, right? Because there are a lot of plans and, other people see it. So now what's next? And I appreciate the thoughtful recommendations on how we can move forward. And I just want to say I was excited to have so many key stakeholders really kind of start to get it like, oh, like people were saying, well, we need to have one voice. We need to be connected. Like, who's going to do that? And it seemed like community members were starting to get it. And so, like, all of that traction that we've been working on is taking on a snowball effect. So I'm super excited to see, really what's coming next. So thank you all.
Thank you. Do we know if there's questions from the virtual audience at all?
Yes, I'm happy to.
Okay.
This question comes from Devontae Ferret from the Intersection magazine. One presenter, I believe it was Will and Jessica, said that people are driving more along Central Ave and are taking the metro less. How does the latter impact the transit area development along the Blue Line corridor?
So how does the reduction in people using the metro? The reduced right. So I think we looked at the data from metro ridership. It's pretty consistent throughout the 4 metro stations in Prince George's County along the Blue Line. It was already declining somewhat steadily before the pandemic. And the pandemic, it dropped. It has started to come back up, and it's only, as we said, at about 60%. To put that in perspective, it's somewhere around 1,600 boardings per day, right? Versus 30,000 vehicles per day along Central Avenue, which is, half of that, 15,000 people going in and then out of DC every day. So what that tells us is it's underutilized, right? The metro stations are underutilized along the Blue Line at the eastern and the western end of this corridor. And, metro stations are probably one of the biggest, most valuable transportation assets you can have in the DMV. They're not going, they almost don't build anymore, right? They're, hundreds of millions of dollars to acquire these assets. And we look at the western side of the corridor, and it's sort of sparsely populated around them. We don't have any multifamily development around these metro stations that would drive that ridership, right? What metro stations allow you to do is to add that density without adding the vehicles, right? And, so I think as far as development goes, I think it's a huge opportunity that the metro it's not seeing a ton of ridership. It's not getting stacked out at Largo and full trains riding through every day. There's capacity for people to get on these stations along the interim. You just need to put the people there to do it. And to do that, you need everything that comes along with the people. It's the commercial that goes along with the residential, the grocery stores and everything else. And then all the arts and the culture. So it's a place where you're looking for a house and you say, I will invest in this area. It's got great, got great roads, nice sidewalks. I'll buy a house here. So hopefully that somewhat answers.
The only thing that came to my mind is the Roslyn-Ballston corridor that was mentioned earlier. That corridor has millions of square feet of development over the years, but the traffic volumes along those roads, Clarendon, Wilson Boulevards, have roughly stayed the same from when before development occurred. So all that development was gained without huge increases in traffic. So the density can be accommodated. Metro is on its way back. We can't predict how the office market might be or how we might commute a year from now or years from now. But as Will mentioned, it's pretty unprecedented to have the amount of vacant land area around a metro station, especially inside the Beltway. That's a pretty big thing to have. So it's key to capitalize on it.
So the market study that's being done as a part of the sector plan actually highlighted that the rental vacancy in this corridor is really, really low. Actually, and it's actually even higher rates in terms of living compared to actually on the east end of the corridor, which is very interesting. And so if you want, and I had mentioned about development that allows for additional revenue that can be reinvestment to the community. So you want the development to take place. So where would you want to take place? Near the metro, so that they don't have to get new vehicles in and they can easily travel. So I'll just add that.
You need the microphone.
It's a great question. And I think that you're absolutely onto it. And so, what I would say is process together. The report is broken into different themes that offers an opportunity to start breaking out into topical groups. This is a lot to take in all at once. I wouldn't say do multiple topics. I'd say start topically. And I think that, I mean, we've talked about snowballing, but I think that starts to become a framework for how a community working group might start to transition to a community-based organization. So I think it's starting to build on the work you all are already doing, right? We know the academy's happening. You are having conversations. You all are powerful enough as well to host those thematic conversations and go ahead and welcome those topic experts in. Call them right back in, right? You've got LISC here. ULI said they're coming back, right? Like make good on all those offers, and then some, because we also have the county. We know the county's there. We know the state's there. We know eyes are on this corridor. Ask, start with the themes and the framework, and then also drive investment. The reason that Greater Riverdale thrives is working, continues to work, and actually had one of the fastest pandemic response rates in the state was because they knew each other, they sat in a room together, they had hard conversations, they had great conversations, they had snacks. And so when the work got started, they were together and they got paid. Someone needs to give money to a group. It is not enough to say, keep coming on and volunteering. Like, that is amazing, and it needs to be formalized, and that, like, other people get paid to be in those rooms. How are people getting paid to be in the rooms? And then how do you start pushing that forward? Because I think once you get those working groups, you get that framework, you start to see what sticks. Everything's not going to stick and everything's not coming at once. But where you get momentum, you build. You build partnerships around the momentum. It's a strengths-based approach. It's an asset-based approach. It's what you all already do. It's just an opportunity, I think, as we heard, that light bulbs started going off, like, oh, you're doing it. You've got that. I need that. How do we build the collective care, and how do you continue to build the relationships that you all have? We heard consistently, how do we develop with a culture of care? How do we not develop with profit at the front, but how do we develop in relation to one another? And that's a differentiator. We don't hear a lot about relationship-based development in the area, and I think that that's also part of it. So I think those are tangible steps, and also, like, hopefully some cheerleading with it, because it is a unique opportunity that you all have. And a lot of what we did share as well, the reason that you saw so much emphasis on what do you do with small parcels? What about the vacant land? How do you welcome more people in? How do you start to make change? How do you start to build trust? How do you start to shift the needle after years of plans, but maybe not much showing up? How do you start it showing up, right? How do you start, again, kind of moving that snowball that there's already that groundswell happening? So, you know, I think it's working groups. I think it's facilitation. I think it's, figure out somebody to pay you.
And I think one of the reasons why we highlighted the last thing in bold, that, one organization, is because when we were in the stakeholder group with the public officials, everyone said, yeah, we should do this. Yeah, we have been talking about doing this, but they said they have been talking about doing this. And we said, we need someone to hold you accountable. You're not going to be accountable. And so that's why even I said, okay, we need to put some timelines and some milestones here, because otherwise it's never going to happen, and someone has to hold you accountable. So that's the reason why we are saying that, and then also that group can bring the framework. I think LISC also has mentioned they have a framework for how they do such kind of things. When should you get the private sector involved? When should you get the county involved? Because you shouldn't go down a path, too much down a path, and then you go to the private sector and say, well, this is not feasible. We can't invest in this. So you have to bring their stakeholders at the right time, and you need someone who is knowledgeable and brings the right capacity to do that.
To add something on just what we're talking about, large infrastructure improvements, very important to keep in mind, like, state and local agencies, they develop these plans. And if they don't have a consistent voice from the community, if the community doesn't get together and sort of bring all of your your complaints or your wants together in one voice to get it across, they spend a lot of time and effort producing a plan that may be horribly received, right? They get so much negative feedback from the community, and they've already invested all this time and money. Maybe the plan doesn't move forward. So the more consistent sort of feedback they can get from a group that we're talking about, then the few people that may be opposed to it don't push it out because you have such a large group that is for it. And so show up, even if you're in support and you don't have any issues with it, show up because the people that are against it, they will show up. And 5 voices against it can outweigh 1,000 for it if the 1,000 don't show up. So just be a part of it.
One of the things I just wanted to add, they were all great comments, and something, Kyle, that you are so good at with Capital Market is just pop-up situations. These temporary pop-up activations, they really are beneficial to add not just the information, but do it in a way that's very interactive, that's fun. So you're supplying information, but you're also allowing the community to engage and do it in a fun way with surveys, with visual props. So I commend you already for doing it. And so as you're breaking out these various components, to continue to look at different ways to make sure that the information is shared in a very interactive way. Are there any other questions?
Thank you all so much for coming out and joining us this afternoon. We're really honored to share this with you. Feel free to reach out to us at ULI Washington at washington@uli.org. Contact Brian and his team at arosado@lisc.org and hang out and talk to us. We're really excited about where we can go from here. Thanks
Yes,
so
and
much.
thank you, Mark, for your help and the ULI staff. Yes. Mark, thanks for all your help in the ULI team. We appreciated the last 2 intense days and all the panel members. It's fun. Thank you.